well and not too wet behind the ears after the rain yesterday and the day before. Still looking a bit grey outside today, but hopefully not going to be too bad. So yeah, as Tanya said, we're going to try and run through a little bit about trees and planning, and hopefully we'll get on to some of the BCC web pages just to show you some of the information that's on there, where you can find information, how you look for planning applications, and then hopefully we'll find something with some. I've got a planning application number already put into the system, which hopefully we'll be able to just pull up the documents on so you can see that what it looks like when you go to search. So just going to bring up a bit of a presentation first. Run through. Hopefully that's up on your screen now. Can you see that, Tanya? Yeah, okay. So the first bit, I think, is just to run through some of the, I suppose, the processes and principles behind this, and then, like I said, we'll go into the documentation. So let's see if I can move down through there. So the planning process is guided by I suppose, the Town and Country Planning Act and the National Planning Policy Framework, and that's a land use and planning policy. And that was originally published by the UK's Department of Communities and Local Government in March 2012, so that's the current one. And it consolidated over 24 previously issued documents called Planning Policy Statements and Planning Policy Guidance Notes for use in England. A revised NPPF was published by Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, as it was then, MHLC, in July, and we've had several updates since then. Most recently trying to take into account things like the Environment Act as well. So it's a constantly updated process, and it goes through multiple reviews. Some people will say to you that every time the planning process is reviewed and reassessed, it weakens the legislation around it. I mean, obviously that's because everybody gets a chance to lobby on it. So house builders and everybody gets a chance to say what they think is wrong with the process as it stands and why they think it's stopping house building or it's impacting the environment too much. So yeah, but we've had those various revisions right the way up until sort of recently, and like I say, we'll continue to have those going forward as new legislation comes on and has to be implemented into the NPPF. If we look at planning consents, it comes in there's different stages. We've got planning permission, so that's the basic permission that most people will be applying for. That's where an application is required, and the local authority is generally responsible for making a decision on that proposal in the first instance. So this might be some householder applications. That might be if you're looking for a large extension or conversion of the house, minor applications and major applications. Now, there's subtle differences between those, which we're not going to go into here. But they tend to be on a size threshold, either by site size or square meterage or types of development. So it could be residential, business, commercial, those kind of things. And then we go through to having things like nationally significant infrastructure projects, which is on the bottom there. There's also things like permitted development rights. So permitted development rights allows you to do certain things to your property or to a locality without gaining planning consent. So if you are a householder and you've not extended the property, you're usually allowed to extend it up to a certain level. That's defined by a number of square meters above the existing threshold. And once you reach that point, anything beyond that would require planning consent, but you'd still need building regulations approval for some of those. In some locations, permitted development rights are removed, so it's always best to check that first. So particularly in things like conservation areas, certain permitted development rights will have been removed, so you always have to ask for that planning consent. We've got planning appeals as well. So if a decision's made in terms of planning consent, there is a right of appeal to the Secretary of State by the planning inspector, and they have a right to make a decision as to whether that planning consent should have been consented or refused, as the case may be. So people might appeal against the decision of granting of permission, but they may also grant against, make a petition for a refusal against a permitted development. We also have outline planning permission, which is or outline consent, and it's often applied for first to establish whether a proposed new dwelling or development will be acceptable to the local authority. And if outline permission is approved, then a detailed proposal is then put forward. As the name suggests, the outline tends to require fewer details being submitted, and then the application may suggest simpler or more modest house types required to obtain the initial outline planning consent. And then we move to the detailed planning permission, which is the next stage, and that's where all the detail comes in. So you might see with some large developments, I mean, if any of you have been looking at things around the city, we've got large development going proposed for the north of Sutton at Langley. So that's coming forward with an outline, well, several outline consents, one for infrastructure, which is like the roads and the drainage system. Then there'll be some outline consents for the building plots, and then there'll be detailed planning permission, which will show you all the facades, the detail of the buildings, the exact layouts, how it's all going to work within there. And that takes a lot more detail, but like I say, defines the materials of the dwellings, etc., and how it all looks. This is an example of one that's coming as both an outline consent and then following on a more detailed consent, and has come through as what we call a phased development as well. So this is already in underway, and much of this is being developed out now. So this is North Worcester Golf Course. This is in just at the back of Northfield, between Northfield and Longbridge. So it's a former golf club, privately owned or member owned. So it wasn't BCC owned land. The golf club decided they could no longer make a viable business of it. They'd looked at offering it out to people like hotel chains for development of a hotel with so I suppose a type of country club type thing on there. That wasn't going anywhere. So the land was bought up for housing. It was quite a contentious site. The proposals come forward, I think it was for just over 1,000 houses on this site, which was refused at planning application stage. A revised application came in for, I think it's around 750, 800 houses on this site. That again was refused, but the developer went to appeal and the consent was given on appeal. So this is something whereby, although the City Council is the planning authority, a decision to consent the development was taken out of the local authority's hands, and the granting given, but the city then has to deal with all the detailed applications and phasing from that point. So this was the initial sort of application, the illustrative master plan. This was showing the site with very basic blocks of, I suppose, initial potential road layouts, retained vegetation and green space. So the piece that's through the middle here was the part of the existing course. If we go back there, that would have been this space down through the middle, and much of this space here to be retained. The tree line on the edge here, tree lines here. So these two woodland blocks, those two woodland blocks there. And then we've had some additional drainage. There was a brook course that runs through the middle, but obviously in losing much of this as totally permeable surfaces, there was a need for additional drainage. So they're proposing that there's a new SUDS system put in down through the middle of the site. So this does protect some of the trees, but as you can see, there'd be quite a substantial number being lost. Now, one thing I will say about this site, having been on it, is that a lot of these trees that you can see that marking out the gaps between the fairways were not particularly old. So they might have been maybe sort of 25, 30 years old, maybe a little bit older, but there was very, very little species diversity across the whole site. There was lots of silver birch and lots of pines, and not a vast amount else until you get into these woodland blocks up here and on this woodland edge, which was a bit more diverse on this embankment. So there's, while it'd be nice to have retained the site as it was and make it into a giant country park, which is what a lot of local residents wanted, in considering just the tree diversity, there wasn't an awful lot of tree diversity on there, and the trees were, while providing benefits, weren't necessarily that big or would take that long to replace if they were lost. So we'll leave it there. So like I said, that's the first design that came in. Then this is showing that same site with a sort of proposed layout as to how those houses might come in play there. And we've got a community hall up the top and a primary school as well having to be built as part of this, because if we're bringing in all these additional dwellings with people in them, there's going to be pressure on the local schools and need for community facilities. So, you know, new play area, new community hall, new primary school as well. Although the developer might not be building out that school, it might be down to the local authority to build that. So this is the sort of thing that we're seeing coming in, and we're having to look at the tree surveys for this sort of site and look at what the impacts are, look at what the potential is for replacing or renewing that development, those trees within there. You can see there's indicative trees throughout here, but we all know that that is just indicative. That doesn't actually mean that those will occur on the ground. So the process of going through a planning application is obviously the developer has to obviously find the site. They have to do their background checks, get their evidence together, and submit the planning application. And there's lots of guidance available on making a planning application on things like the planning portal and the government's pages and on local government's pages. That then comes into the local authority, so we get notification and consultation with community and statutory consultees. So this is where you'll see those notices being pasted out on things like lampposts and telegraph poles, telling people that there's a planning application being submitted. If you're adjoining the site, you should get a letter through the door. But it is quite a tight turnaround, and you know, for us as arboriculturists within the city's planning department, getting 21 days, that's including weekend days as well. So we actually only get 15 days to look through all of those plans and come up with some kind of position statement on whether we think the impacts are acceptable, and if they are, if there's any mitigation that's required, or if they're not acceptable, we need to set out a case for that. That then goes to the planning officer, and depending on the scale of the planning officer, they have 8 weeks from the point that the application was received, or 13 weeks for major applications to make a decision and issue those. Now, most planning officers will actually have a delegated decision-making power. So for small-scale developments, household applications, those kinds of things, there's usually they're usually able to make those decisions themselves and pass those on. And just to give some context to that, our householder team are having to determine 500 applications per week. No, per month. Sorry, 500 a month. Sorry, not per week. 500 a week, that'd be an awful lot. 500 a month. So there's a lot of applications for them to look at. And so to go through another process of having to go to a planning committee would be quite unwieldy, particularly with those numbers. The larger and more controversial developments then go to a planning committee, which is made up of elected members. They have the evidence presented to them with an officer's report, either recommending planning consent be granted, or planning consent may be refused, or maybe that it could be granted with an amendment, and they take into account that information. The applicants also have an opportunity to comment, as do any objectees as well. So, but they're all limited on time. I think they only have something like 3 minutes to make any representation to committee. So it's not a particularly long time. Then obviously, as we've said there, if the application is refused, the applicant has the right to appeal to the Secretary of State via the Planning Inspectorate. And if the local authority refuses, they could grant it subject to conditions, or we also may recommend that if the Planning Inspectorate was to grant it, that it would need to come in a particular style or with particular conditions attached. So we do have a little bit of influence over that, but not a massive amount. As we said, it's not always necessary to make a planning application. So if you've got permitted development rights, you might not need to make a planning application, but you do need to check beforehand if there is any other sort of steps that are required before you go ahead to undertake work. So particularly works to protected trees. So if you're in a conservation area, all the trees are protected by planning consent, then you'd need to make an application for tree works under those if they were going to be impacted. And that gives the local authority time to consider that proposal. But there are some other ones there as well, things like advertisement consent, listed building consent, environmental permits, building regulations, etc. So, yes, we just sort of covered that there. So yeah, if we've got, and the tree preservation orders and conservations come in different, conservation areas come in different sort of levels. So the conservation area conservation areas are designated across a geographic area. Within Birmingham, there are 34 conservation areas. Some of those are quite extensive. So one of those covers much of Edgbaston as the ward. So it covers a whole variety of housing types, and it covers all trees within that area, except anything under 7.5 centimetres trunk diameter. So anything above that, you'd need to at least make a notification of an intent to undertake some tree works. That must be done 6 weeks in advance. There are also TPOs in those areas as well, so that requires a notification of or an application for tree works in that case, and we have the right to refuse those applications if we think that that work is detrimental. So that could be that if you're looking to install an extension and there's going to be significant root pruning, we could refuse that work, and that would in theory stop that extension going ahead if it was something that's being done and permitted development rights. Same applies if it's planning consent as well. We also can require conditions for certain works to be undertaken or to be undertaken in a particular way. So let's get on to a little bit about what sorts of things that we'll be looking for when we're looking at these planning applications. So planning applications where trees are involved should come with a report on any trees that are within influencing distance of that development, and that report should be in line with what we call BS 5837. So you'll find that we refer to these quite a lot rather than saying what the title of the document is. And that's a British standard which says it's called Trees in Relation to Design, Demolition and Construction, and it's recommendations. So it's not statutory. I suppose it's a good practice guideline, if you want to call it that. And again, these things are revised from time to time as new information comes to the fore. I think there might be a revision of this going on at the moment. I've lost track of where we are with this. In this, it sets out, again, it tries to set these out in line with things like the RIBA, so the Royal Institute of British Architecture's design process, so that people can get the right information at the right time to advise and guide the design of development schemes. And although this is set out in this document and there is the RIBA process as well, it's surprising how many times this isn't followed. So really the first things that need to happen if we're thinking about trees is that topographical survey, soil assessments are undertaken, and tree survey. This is at feasibility stage. So this is before you even get down into doing your designs. The tree categorization is part of the tree survey process, as is starting to identify tree constraints and the root protection areas, the RPAs. This should feed into the design brief. So trees are a material consideration in the planning process. So this should be being engaged, it should be being thought about before you start to plan out what you want to put on the site. The design brief leads into conceptual design, and that comes in with identifying and reviewing potential trees for retention and removal based on sort of the designs and thinking about the categorization and value of those trees. And then the conceptual design leads into design development, and this is when we're looking for the people to produce new planting and landscape proposals and produce a tree protection plan. And this is sort of really before you get into planning consent. However, we often see designs coming forward that haven't had the tree survey done or haven't had this process run through in terms of the design. They've come up with a design, and then somebody's basically fitted this around the process to sort of go, oh, well, these trees have to come out because they're clashing with the building, rather than thinking, well, we should be moving the building to retain these trees because these trees have significant value in the local area. The development design should lead into technical design and production information and tender documentation. So looking at resolving tree protection proposals, agreeing new utility operation locations and our methodology. So if you're building a new development site, thinking about where your new services are going to run. You don't want to run them straight through the middle of a group of trees. Can you route them around there? If it has to go through a particular area, how do you put them through there? You don't necessarily want to open trenches or other ways of avoiding impacts on trees. You'll end up with a schedule of trees for removal and pre-construction tree works. So that might be you've got trees on a roadway in, but your lorries coming in need 6 meters clearance and you've not had that. So there might be what we call facilitation pruning. So is there a list of trees that need pruning works in order to facilitate the development? That needs to be included in there. And all those tree protection measures should be included on all relevant documents. Then moving through, it's going through to before work is actually started on site, physical barriers should be erected, then site clearance and demolition, thinking about the access, storage, and working areas. Moving through, then you go through your construction phases, and then usually the new planting comes in and remedial work at the end. So there's a clear chronology set out for considering trees in development. And when you look at this, you realise just how often this isn't followed. If it was followed all the time, we'd probably have a lot less issues with trees being impacted by development. But monitoring of this is very difficult for both the local authority, who have very few staff available to do that, and also you'd be relying on the developer to retain an arboricultural clerk of works to oversee the various stages where trees would be impacted. But that process is set out there. If we go back to the tree survey, then in the 5837 survey, there's a cascade chart of tree quality and assessment. And this categorises trees into 4 main categories, as we can see here. The top one being category U, and those are usually indicated on a plan with a red mark like that. So these are trees that are in such a condition that they cannot realistically be retained as living trees in the context of the current land use longer than 10 years. So that's quite, I mean, I think 10 years is still quite a long time. And this is where you have an issue in terms of how this interplays with biodiversity. Because we look at what the description is here of U category trees, it says trees that have serious irremediable structural defect, so something that you can't remedy through pruning, such that their early loss is expected due to collapse, including those that will become unviable after removal of other category U trees. So there might be where you've got companion sheltering there. Trees that are dead or showing signs of significant, immediate and irreversible overall decline, and trees that are infected with pathogens of significance to the health and or safety of other trees nearby, or very low quality trees suppressing adjacent trees of better quality. Now, trees that are dead or showing significant signs of decline or have pathogens in them, so fungi, could be of high biodiversity value. So we do get a clash between what an ecology report says and what an arboricultural report says. So an arbor report might say, well, these are U category trees, let's remove those. But the biodiversity report may say, we need to be retaining these because these are bat roost habitats. So it's a tricky one, I think, for people to deal with. Then we've got A to C, and these are going down. So A are trees of high quality, and then they're also subcategorized with either they're of A category with mainly arboricultural qualities, so that they're particularly good examples of their species, rare or unusual. Trees that have landscape qualities, so they might be trees of particular visual importance, or there might be cultural values as well. So there might be historical or commemorative value, or there might be the conservation value. So here we're talking about veteran trees or wood pastures. So interestingly, if we think about any of the discussions that we've had on ancient and veteran trees, and some of those ancient trees are probably, you might almost potentially class some of them as U category. If you looked at the state of them, they might be at risk of imminent collapse. They might not necessarily be that sort of, safe. They will be showing signs of decline because of their age, but actually, because of those other features, because of their age, because of their cultural values, they should actually be being classified as A3 in classification there. Generally, we do see that, but that's not always the case. I mean, there are things that I think we see that are classified as U, particularly trees that are, I suppose, typically shorter lived. So things like, rowans and birch, which for their species would be classed as ancient, but obviously compared with the age range of oaks, most people wouldn't. So we do often see that that's there. And there is a little bit of discrepancy, I think, between these. Then we go down to category B trees and then category C. So this also causes, I think, a little bit of contention down here. So this says trees of low quality with an estimated life expectancy of at least 10 years, or young trees with a stem diameter below 150 millimeters. I think the intention there is the fact that these trees could fairly readily be replaced within the landscape within a short space of time. But that's not to say that any of these trees with a stem diameter below 150 mil won't be category B or A trees in the future. So I think this is where some consideration needs to be made about, well, actually, these trees could be particularly good, and do we want to lose that period of time that it takes to get these trees back? So particularly considering climate change. So I think there's a lot more factors coming into this. It's not as clear cut as just going, yes, we'll retain A and B, and actually C trees are expendable, because this may still be, a 20, 30 year gap between planting new trees and getting them back to there. This needs to be relayed onto, or can't get the right word out, put onto a plan, and also into a report as well. So this is the sort of thing we're expecting to see in reports. So within the arboriculture report, we'll see a table, like the one at the top of the page here, listing out the tree reference number. So we've got T1. This will indicate that it's an individual tree. G3 might be a group of trees, or I suppose group would be best on there, but it might put it's putting the overall height on there. You might also see things listed with an H as well if it's forming part of a hedgerow. So here we've got the individual common names, got the height in meters, the stem diameter at 1.5 meters, the branch spread, north, east, south, west. So those of you that have done the iTree Eco Survey, you'll be aware of this same process. Height of first branch in meters. That's particularly important if we're thinking about the access routes and the height of buildings. So is there going to require any facilitation pruning? This will give us an indication. Height of canopy in meters, the age as well. So we've got young, semi-mature, mature, and then you go to sort of ancient and veteran beyond there. Remaining lifespan, general observations, and then the categorization. And then the RPA, so the root protection area, comes from the diameter at the DBH there. And then there are charts within the 5837 survey as well, which allows you gives you a ready reckoner. So if you've got a stem diameter of 75 mil, the radius of the circle is 0.9 of a meter. And then so that gives us a root protection area of 3 square meters. And this is how we're expecting to see things portrayed on a plan, sort of like this in this corner here. So we've got the tree number, we've got maybe a color that's relating to the category. We're looking at a line for the crown spread, but we also can see the shading arc as well. And that's quite important if we're thinking about what's the impact on the building of shading, for example. Are we going to be having significant shading on a building on rooms that are going to be required to be used all day? Does that mean that then they'll have to have lights on in the building? Does that impact energy consumption, etc.? And this is what a plan might look like. This was just taken as a snapshot off the web, so it isn't anywhere in particular that I know of. And this is also showing some of the tree constraints and tree protection measures as well. So we're seeing the trees plotted out on the plan. We've got some C category trees here because they're in grey. The B category trees here in blue. We can see where tree protection fencing is going to have to be put up to protect the root protection area of this tree here, and then to prevent any access into the remaining garden here to protect those trees. And then areas where we need tree protection measures as well. So here we've got the access road in. That's crossing through the rooting area of these trees. So here we've got some ground protection being proposed in there. And then here we've got a bit where it says pile foundation. So an excavation would normally have to go through here to build foundations for this building. But what it's suggesting here is actually you don't dig out a big trench and fill it with concrete because you're cutting through the rooting area of this tree. So actually what would be done is a pile and beam foundation. So vertical piles, either concrete or steel, would be driven into the ground, and then a beam, supporting beam, laid across the top of those, off which everything is built. And we've also got a little bit of supervised hand dig on the corner here for whatever reason that is there. So these are the sort of plans that we're expecting to see. The protection fencing that might go up, this is the standard detail that's set out in 5837. This is showing a sort of a mesh fence panel, and then anchored into the ground using vertical poles and horizontals as well. Quite often we see these just standing on the rubber blocks, and then at some point somebody goes, you know, I can't quite get my machine around there, so we'll push that fence line back, or we just need to dig into there a little bit, so they'll push the fence line back again. And so you do get incursion into the root protection zone. So particularly on big sites, it's essential that proper, well installed tree protection fencing is put up. Where trees are in very close proximity to existing buildings, or where some development is going to be taking place, then other methods might need to go in, particularly if you can't give that separation because you need a working area. So here we've got an example of the fencing going in, but then a series of got like a geotextile fabric here being laid as a load spreading membrane. Or if we've got things like scaffolding going up, then again, maybe the geotextile or boarding going down first to spread that load to prevent the compaction on this rooting area. And then everything is built off the top of there. So there's lots of different ways that tree protection can go in. Here's a few more, so just as examples. So here we've got an existing tree in hard landscaping. There probably is going to be very little impact in terms of compaction on the rooting area, but just to provide that additional protection, they've boxed out with paneling around the trunk, same as in this bottom right-hand image as well. That protects the trunk from accidental knocks and bangs. And then we've also got some boarding here. This is the bottom left-hand one is an example of geotextiles. So they're using a cell structure, which is infilled with gravels to provide a base. This can be temporary or it can be permanent. And this is probably to provide to raise the levels here, probably for a building plot, but also will provide some protection against compaction of rooting, although the tree's on the other side of the ditch anyway there. And this top right-hand one is something where a screw pile system is used. So you have steel or giant steel screws really, which get pushed into the ground or driven into the ground, and then everything else is balanced on that. So these take the load directly vertically down through the soil rather than spreading it out through the ground. So you don't need to be digging trenches through rooting areas. It's all balanced on this. This surface allows water to percolate through. So we've got air exchange, water exchange, and no compaction. So it's really quite a good system. It's just that all of these things don't come in as cheaply as just basically pouring concrete onto a surface or using a sub-base of stone or trench fill. Ancient woodland, we'll just go a quick run through that. So ancient woodland, it takes hundreds of years to establish and is defined as an irreplaceable habitat in the NPPF. It's also one of the irreplaceable habitats that's put in the Environment Act, and basically says the impacts on those is unacceptable. It's important for wildlife, its soils, recreational value, and also cultural and historical and landscape value. Ancient woodlands, anything that's been continuously wooded since 1600 AD, and that includes ancient semi-natural woodland made up of trees and shrubs native to the site. And we also do have plantations on ancient woodland sites. So these are often called PAWS, so plantations on ancient woodland sites, PAWS. And they might be areas that were broadleaf trees that retain some ancient woodland features, but maybe planted with conifer or other species. They can be restored back to a more semi-natural woodland over time, and that is something that would be, promoted through any sort of woodland management process. So they have equal protection in the National Planning and Policy Framework. Other distinct forms of ancient woodland are wood pastures as well, and historic parkland. Both of those are on there. So ancient and veteran trees, we've already mentioned about being valuable, but also traditional orchards as well come into this sort of category as well. So we do find that within some of the larger gardens in Edgbaston or maybe elsewhere in the city, we are finding elements of traditional orchards within there that deserve protection as a habitat. And so although the trees may not be in great condition, it's the habitat value that's coming out there. When we're making planning decisions about any development on or near or around, shouldn't be on an ancient woodland site or near that, we have to be thinking about conserving and enhancing biodiversity, reducing the level of impact of the proposal, development on ancient woodlands and the ancient veteran trees. And it says in the NPPF, it says you should refuse plan permission if a development will result in the loss or deterioration of ancient woodland, ancient trees, and veteran trees. And this is always the kick in the teeth, unless there are wholly exceptional reasons and there's suitable compensation strategy in place. Not sure how you devise a suitable compensation strategy for loss of ancient woodland or ancient trees, because you're not going to get something that's going to replace those in anything less than 200, 300, 400 years. Think about the effects on ancient woodland. There are many, and they can be at some distance as well. This is something from the Woodland Trust's, I suppose, ancient woodland booklet on development. So thinking about fragmentation, thinking about inappropriate forestry operations, how intensive agriculture may be within there. Is that causing soil erosion? Are the fertilizers and herbicides having an impact on that ancient woodland? If you've got industrial development, even at some distance away from the woodland, is there a risk of waterborne pollution, air pollutants, dust deposits, etc.? So it doesn't have to be that a development is occurring right in or adjacent to an ancient woodland. It could be several miles away that still has an impact. So you have to think carefully about what the impacts are and what those developments are and what your sensitive receptors are. So although developers often only like to look at the bit that they're going to be working on, we as arboriculturists and ecologists have to think a lot broader than that and further afield. Mitigation measures will depend on the type of development, but could include improving the woodland, putting up barriers to screen or protect that, reduce noise and light pollution, protecting the ancient and veteran trees by designing open space around them, and putting buffer zones in. At the moment, the NPPF says that a buffer zone around an ancient or veteran tree should at least be 15 times larger than the diameter of the tree. For most trees, that RPA, or the root protection zone, is 12 times the diameter, so slightly larger there. And the buffer zone should be 5 meters from the edge of trees canopy if that area is larger than 15 times the diameter. And then the same goes for buffer zone around ancient woodland. They're talking about 15 meters, but really that's not sufficient. We know that trees rooting goes well beyond 15 meters. And the Woodland Trust, in their Planner's Manual for Ancient Woodland, suggests a precautionary principle as a minimum buffer of 50 meters. So considerably more than the 15 meters that's proposed in the NPPF. The buffer zone should look to contribute to the wider ecological networks, should consist of semi-natural habitats, shouldn't consist of gardens. So you can't have your gardens as part of a buffer zone for ancient woodlands. So that's one thing to always be looking out for on plans. And it should avoid putting sustainable drainage schemes in unless they're respecting the root protection areas. But you still need to think about those hydrological impacts. It may increase the drainage on a woodland if you're putting suds in nearby because there's an easier route out for water, or it may increase the water table, which again might affect the trees. So that's that for that one there. Can I just go to another screen there? So have we got a different screen up there? Have I got my planning page? Okay, right, good. So hopefully I can flick between these. Oh, hang on, bear with me. Don't want all this, do we? I'm trying to work out how I get the right screen up that I want. It should be more than one of those. That's strange. I thought I had more than one web page up, but I appear not to have.
We can see your tabs at the top, Simon.
Oh, you can see the tabs at the top. I can't see the tabs at the top. Oh. That's useful. Oh, hang on. There we go. I wonder if I can move something to. I'm just gonna have a think. How am I going to do this that I can see the tabs easier? Bear with me while I'm trying to see if I can move this bit. Okay. That's better. I can see the tabs now. Is that still okay for you to see? You still see that okay? Yeah, okay. So thinking about the documents that are on that guide Birmingham City Council's planning process. We have the Birmingham Plan, which is to 2031. This is our local development plan. And this sets out the policies by which development is controlled within the city. And it sets out a framework around how developers need to present information and what we will find as acceptable or unacceptable. There's a whole, I won't go through the whole thing, but there's a whole series of contents on here. Try and get it in the right place. So there are areas in the city where there's where growth is being looked at, and these are particularly around some of the local centres in the city. We've got a chapter on, didn't see about all over the place now. We've got chapters on environment and sustainability, and this covers carbon, this covers climate change, but also the green infrastructure network, which is where, and biodiversity and geodiversity, and this is where trees are considered in this, and then economy of network centres, homes and neighbourhoods, etc. So we've got all of those. So that was the adopted plan, not that. Then we've got, if you go into the BCC web pages, or just go onto Google and search Birmingham City Council design guide, should be this page, should take you to this page. Then we've got a series of guides here which are downloadable, which will talks developers or anybody who's interested through the principles of development in Birmingham. So we've got a design principles document, then a city ID, streets and spaces, landscape and green infrastructure manual, healthy living and working, and efficient and future ready city. So that's thinking about energy security. It's also thinking about impacts of climate change. If you go to the green infrastructure page, you can download the document, and then you'll get a PDF that looks like this. And in here, there's a whole series of city notes that talks people through about the sorts of information that's required and how information should be portrayed and what we're looking for from development going forward. So we'll just skip through a few pages here. The first one is about looking at protecting and using existing landscape assets, because they are our most important feature, really. can't sort of, we don't want to lose the existing landscape that we have. So we think about, we wouldn't want to see Edgbaston lose all of its trees, for example, because that's a part of its character. It's also providing huge amount of biodiversity benefit and ecosystem services benefit. Talk about respecting the existing character areas. We talk about giving space to soft landscaping. So at the moment in our planning policies, we've not got anything that's sort of too explicit, but in the review of that local plan that we've got at the moment, we're looking at implementing policies around things like urban greening factor, which would require a minimum amount of urban greening in any one development. And that could be greening provided at ground level, walls, or rooftop level as well. We cover about how spaces aid health and well-being as well. So we're covering that across a lot of different aspects here. Hang on. What's this one here? Hard landscape features, green roofs, living walls we've got on there. Then we get into protecting the trees. So we've got requirements. So it sets out the sequential production of those documents. So the tree survey, tree constraints plan, arboricultural impact assessment, method statement, so how things might be done, and the tree protection plan. So we're talking about what we require in that tree survey, which was already set out in that 5837 document. And then we move through to talk about replacement planting and off-site compensation and what we're expecting. So this is where we get into, you'll probably heard us talk before about CAVAT, so the capital asset valuation of amenity trees. So this design guide is an adopted supplementary planning document. So it forms part of the planning policy process. So now we require developers, when they're looking at sites, they need to get that survey, but they also need to get the valuation of the trees as well using CAVAT. And that also plays a part in thinking about what trees should be retained and where trees are being lost, how they replace those. It's no good just sticking in some small trees up the corner that are never going to achieve anything. They're not going to achieve the benefits that were being lost. So here, this asks that the trees must look to match or exceed the values that are being lost. And to get to that point, trees must have really the space to grow, be free from as many constraints as possible, and have access to appropriate soil and water resources to reach mature size. If they can't do that on site, then we do have the option through what we call a Section 106 agreement to secure funding for then the city to deliver tree planting that will mitigate for those losses. None of these are ever going to be an ideal situation because really we'd rather not lose trees if we can help it. But this at least means that if we don't get acceptable levels of tree planting back on site, then we can secure some money for that. And it can soon add up. I think if you've seen us talk about CAVAT, we're talking about trees that are sometimes valued at £70,000 or £80,000 or £100,000 and upwards. So it can soon build up. So even the small trees, when they added together, can amount to quite a large amount of money. We then talked about, we've given some guidance to people who are looking at small scale developments and householders. We're talking about neighbouring trees, pruning of tree stock. We've got some information about the average percentage tree cover by land use type. And then we talk about tree planting in new development. So this is again where we're coming back to that detail about responding to constraints on site, responding to highways, thinking about the climate and long-term benefits of trees. And sort of saying that, quite often highways developers, highways engineers will be going, well, we can't have a tree that that goes over what they call the kinematic envelope of the vehicle, of the highway. So they're always going, oh no, we only need kilometre trees here. But you drive down Alton Boulevard, you drive down the Bristol Road, you drive down Tyburn Road, any of these big dual carriageways in the city, the trees spread out over the highway. All we need to ensure is that through appropriate tree species selection and some formative pruning, that we can get that 6 meters clearance over the highway, as we've got here. So we don't need to have columnar trees just in these locations. We can have other species. We also put some detail in here. I mean, this is, really, I suppose, the absolute minimum that should be provided. We were talking about for trees to reach their ideal potential or optimum, they need access to root available soil volumes. So we've set some minimum target volumes here. So a minimum of 30 cubic meters for individually planted trees that are going to get to large or medium size coming down. I know this sounds particularly small, 5 meters per small tree when planted as a group of 2 or more. So there is evidence that shows that trees that are planted in conjoined rooting volumes that share some of that volume together actually can do better, some mutual benefit from that. So you can reduce that down slightly. So we asked for details around that and how is that going to be produced? So is that looking at using structural soils? Is it using tree crates or raft systems to provide that? And then we've got biodiversity geofences. That's in that one there. Okay. So you're thinking about planning applications that might be by you, and you want to have a look to see what's going on. Planning applications are a matter of public record. So you can go onto the council's web pages, you can just search City Council application search, and that should bring you up to a page that looks like this. So this is the main application search page. And if you've seen a notice up, you should see a number similar to this one. This was a 2022 application, so it's 2022/06931/PA. That should be enough to take you to that planning application. Otherwise, you can search by application type. So you can see the different types of application there. The site address, keywords, the constituency, if you know that, the ward, the applicant name. And we can also search by dates as well. So set a number of months. So all applications within the last month. So you can do that as well. So if you want to have a trawl and see what else is in your area, you can do that. But we're going to just go to this one here. So we put the number in the application search box there. And I'm going to click search. This worked earlier. So there we go. So this gives you the application number. I personally feel this isn't very clear when you come onto this, but you'll notice that this number is now in like a pinky purple color, where the rest is in black text. When I hover over that, you'll see as a line comes up underneath it, so that allows us to see the application details. It gives us the site address. It tells us a description of the development. There's demolition of vacant police station building and associated structures, and erection of 29 affordable dwellings with access parking, landscaping and associated works. It tells us when it was registered. It tells us it was registered, sorry. It tells us the date it was received, which was the 8th of September 2022. And it also tells us if there's an application decision been made, which there isn't there. So we click on the number. This takes us to a page that looks like this. But again, it repeats some of that detail. It tells you the application number, application type. Remember we were saying about outline, detailed design, full planning. So here we've got full planning. It tells us site address, proposals, the planning officer, the area team, the applicant, Wonderful Homes, I'm sure they will be, the ward, the constituency, has an appeal been submitted or not. So we scroll down the page, and then we've got other application, other information available for planning applications. So we've got application dates, consultee details, and associated documents. Now I'm just going to see where it says here. Oh yeah, and what I should have said is, when you've reviewed that, if you come back to this page where it says application registered, and it says 10th of the 10th, 2022, and then there's a button here that says submit comments here. So if you want to review the documents, you can then come back to this page and you can make comments on that application, and those will go forward and they will be registered and reviewed, and we have to respond to those sorts of comments. Now, I will say, as we go through, if you are going to comment on planning application, don't just put, I object to this application, because that's not really sufficient. We need to know what the reasons are. It's been the same process for a member of the public really of objecting to a planning application or supporting it even, as one of us as a statutory consultee. We need to set out why we think that we should be objecting or supporting this or asking for a particular amendment. So we're going to click on associated documents. Now you can see here, if we scroll to the bottom page, there's 95 documents. The page shows 10 at a time, unless you click on here. So you can show up to 100 documents on the page. So you've got a long list here. We'll see how this works. It depends how these documents are registered, but if we type in the search documents and we type tree, we're going to get anything. Yeah, so there we go. That's good. Sometimes it's arboricultural, sometimes it's tree. So you'll see we've got the documents pertaining to this development here. So we've got the tree constraints and impact report, a proposed street elevations, amended plans, tree survey. So this is the tree survey and arboricultural impact assessment report, and another one which is existing proposed I think that means existing and proposed street elevations. You can see that it's a plan or a survey and supporting statement. I'm hoping this works now. So it looks like a bit of a. So if you click view, that should take you to the document. And here we can see. Now, when you get used to reading tree surveys, you'll know that there's a lot of information that's often the same, as it sets out the rationale behind it, why it was commissioned, etc. So you tend to skip over a lot of that if you're reading these. So survey methodology should be the same. It should be following the same process. So this is the sort of thing that we'll get to see. So we can see who the principal report author was, who reviewed it, what their qualifications were. I mean, here we can see the principal report author says Jacqueline Bayliss, landscape architect. Doesn't tell us that they have any arboricultural qualifications though there. Also, they don't have to have, but it's often useful. So background, who's commissioned report. This is the bit where it just sets out the bit around the different categorizations. So again, if you know that, that's the standard information, same as the age structure. Then we get on to the impact of proposed impact on proposed developments. Where do we get to? Trees and groups requiring removal to achieve the proposed layout are listed as follows. For further details, please refer to the tree data information contained within Appendix A. Have we already gone past it with something that says how many trees we're going to? So, yeah, it says the proposed development layout is shown within drawing P001 Rev P. So you can make a note of that and go back and find that document. Is revealed the proposed layout supports the retention of a significant number of trees at the site. The impact on trees is shown in red kite drawing 458.12 arboricultural impact plan. Of the 68 trees and groups surveyed, 31 will require removing. Now, we've said here it supports the retention of a significant number of trees. Losing nearly 50% of the trees does not say to me that that's retaining a significant number. That says that's losing half, really. That's not significant. That's a significant loss, not significant retention. And so we can see the trees there here going through into Appendix A. So here's the table telling us what the species is, the age, structural condition. Is there anything about it? So here we've got one growing in a neighbouring garden, so that might be impacted by development. This can be quite lengthy. Go through. You can see that sometimes can take quite a bit of review to read through. There we go. So this is the site as it stands. So this is the old Yardley Wood Road police station, and you can see the trees that are on there that are, I suppose, the trees that are ACAT. So they're saying that really only T9 on there was an A category tree. Those sort of blue purple ones are all the B category trees, and the C category trees are the ones in grey. If we scroll down a bit further, we'll move on to the next map down. So this is then showing their arboricultural impact plan. So what they've got here is they've got trees that are outlined, that got a ring of blue around the outside, which are category B trees or groups to be removed, and those that are plain red would be the Cat C trees to be removed. They're still retaining the Cat A tree, and some of these B category trees are along this edge along here. And you can see that this is overlaid, or the trees are overlaid with the proposed development boundaries underneath. So our role as an arboriculturalist that we're aiming to go, well, actually, what is the value of these trees? Okay, what is this actually acceptable? What mitigation can be provided? But some of these trees may not be that great a quality. We've got this sort of woodland group in the corner. It might be that this is all sycamore, it's all same age, it's a lot of self-set stuff that's been allowed to grow. And actually, we can achieve greater benefits by having a better planting plan in place. So we have to make comments about that. We also have to make comments about, so like if we look here, I can hopefully zoom in a bit. We'll see whether it reacts at the end. So we've got the A category tree here, but we've got, Rachel's going there. We've got foundations that incur into the root protection area of these trees. Now, I'll say it's foundation. The foundation is just about there. This looks like it's probably slabs or something put as an access path around the outside. Is that acceptable? The crown extent is this green line. Now, in our design guide, we're actually saying that people should be considering ensuring that they've got at least 5 meters separation between the edge of the crown and any building. And that if the tree isn't yet mature, they should be considering what that mature tree size is going to be if it's a retained tree, and ensuring that they are building outside of that mature canopy line. We can say that, we can try and do that as much as we can, and we try and enforce that. Can be difficult at times, because then we'll get developers complain that we're ceasing to make the site viable. In other words, they're not able to make as much profit as they wanted. So things like this. I mean, the risk is here that building this property this close to this tree, if this tree has the potential still to grow more, this canopy is going to come into contact with the building, and then we're going to start finding complaints about the fact that this tree is now damaging the building, and we'll get requests for pruning of that tree. Or ultimately, the tree is shading these properties too much, and therefore they want the tree removed because they're having to have the lights on during the day, or they're having to, so therefore their cost of electricity and fuel has gone up. So these are all sorts of things that we need to consider. And when we're talking about this, it would have been useful if the shadow plan would have been put on here. Most of these plans are usually north at the top of the map, so you can sort of guess that if north's here, then actually the shadow plan is going to be swinging around, so that actually it's not going to be these rooms at the back are not going to be receiving direct sunlight or having direct sunlight blocked by that tree. But it may be that some consideration needs to be given in terms of the design of the building, that these should not be permanently habitable rooms. So like a living room, it might be a bathroom or a bedroom, where actually the impact on shading is going to be negligible. So we'd have to make our comments based on that. We also have to make our comments based on what we think a suitable planting plan is going to be. I'll go back to that list there, tree constraint, and then we've got this might just be the ARB report as a plan on its own. Impact assessment. So again, looking at the same thing. So you might find that you've got existing plans and revised plans. If they've changed the layout, you might get a revision of a plan coming. So let's see if I can. So what else we got? The other things that we might have to review are things like the drainage layouts. So how does the drainage plan impact on trees? You notice that wasn't laid out on that plan there, but it may be that on here. So really what they should be showing on these plans is they should be showing how this might impact trees. There is an existing driveway already up, so we're just looking at tying these properties in to the existing drain network. So that's not so bad in terms of impact on trees because it's following on to an existing drainage layout. But if we've got sustainable urban drainage going in, that tends to be going in soft landscapes. That might be having pipe work that's connecting various areas together. That might be coming through areas of tree rooting area because the disciplines who've been employed haven't been working closely together. That's essential, really, that all of these disciplines work together, share information, and that the plans feed together. That's often where you see the most issues arising, is because individual consultees have looked. Our drainage team might look at this and go, well, actually, yes, we've got this is a geocellular crate here. This is a Hatch Grey. That's an underground storage tank. That may be acceptable to take the stormwater from these properties and then release it out to this drain. That's maybe fine. But this may be, it's not shown on here, but we can see the trees, but there might have been that there was some impact on tree rooting there. This is only showing the retained trees, so not too bad there, but yeah, it's not always visible on these plans. And what else we've got? Ground remediation. Don't know whether we've got. Doesn't look like we've got any proposed planting plans. So arising from this then would come either a recommendation for approval, but it would also come with a set of conditions as well. So I can't show you the conditions at the moment, so on a different laptop, but those conditions would be around implementing proposed plans for tree protection measures, implementing the approved working methods for around trees, approving the tree retention plan, but there may also be a requirement for a new landscape plan that shows the tree planting in there. It'll have a management plan, an establishment plan, and so on. So that would come then as a discharge of condition. So once they've started work, they may then be submitting those documents as we go. We've also got on here, we've also got things like, if people are interested, biodiversity net gain calculations. We've got a bat roost presence absence report as well. And that's important as well if we think about the tree constraints. So I would look at the bat roost report. Are there trees that have got strong bat roost potential in there? Are those trees being proposed for removal? So this is, again, showing you how cross-discipline needs to come together to create a suitable set of comments for planning process. Right. Go back on there. Right. Let me stop sharing for a minute. Right. I'm getting a bit of a dry mouth now because I've been talking for so long. But I mean, are there any questions at the moment? Is there anything you want me to look at more? Is there anything you want to discuss more?
There's some questions in the chat, if that's okay, Simon.
Okay, yeah.
So from Anne, she's saying that City Council planners have told us that additional pressures on services, schools and GPs, as opposed to, for example, traffic impacts, are not relevant planning considerations when submitting an objection. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, there you're asking somebody who's an arboriculturist and an ecologist about planning policy. I mean, to me, I think they are actually relevant. Whether it actually allows us to factor that in the Town and Country Planning Act, I'm not sure. They're probably not likely to tell you something that isn't right. I mean, I do think it should be a consideration. The fact that for that major development, we were looking at the North Worcester Golf Course. Now there, that was something that the comments that have come in have already looked at the existing population and the school's provision. So it has highlighted the fact that there is a requirement for additional school placements within that catchment based on the fact that there are new properties with children likely to be coming in. So it has to be taken into account to an extent. I don't know as it necessarily significantly impacts the decision. But obviously, we've secured funding there for the building of a new school. It may be that money is not spent on a new school there, but spent on putting additional classroom space on the nearby schools. But yeah, we've had to do it. But you're right. I think this is where there's a lot of contention around whether you want to call them 15-minute neighbourhoods, whether you want to call them livable neighbourhoods, healthy living zones, whatever you want to call them. You know, why I don't. There's a lot of discussion out there. I mean, the town I live in, I can pretty much walk to everything within everything that I would need on a regular basis within 15 minutes. I can walk to a supermarket. I can walk to the doctors. I can cycle to the doctors. I can drive to those in a few minutes. Basically, I live in a 15-minute town. And you know, I suppose that's what people are trying to say, aren't they? You know, you should be able to have access to that, and it would put more emphasis on the provision of services and ensuring that there's some element of providing adequate resources within each neighbourhood, wouldn't it? But
yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, I've got another question. Does the City Council need to publicise the deadline for certificate of lawful development consultations? Council are currently saying no. And I don't know what a certificate of lawful development consultation is.
Again, I'm not the planning officer. I will say that most of the time, you know, I know people don't necessarily want to hear this, but you know, generally what you're being told is right. It's a lot of people think there's a conspiracy theory, and I can tell you it takes a lot more effort to have a conspiracy thing than it does to actually just tell the truth. Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look that up or ask a planning officer about that. Yeah.
Okay. As part of the policies that you were showing us, Simon, is there anything in there about protecting grass verges on roads? I know that's not a tree thing, but is that?
Yeah, not specifically in there as such. That not that's that explicit. I mean, I think it does come into elements of the climate change policies. So consideration of that soft landscape and the role that plays in intercepting stormwater. It would also tie into some of the flood risk policies, which also tie into climate resilience as well. So we maybe that as we move forward, we don't see as many grass verges as we see them today, but we may see more things like rain gardens. So they may be, you know, slightly lower areas that are planted up. So we don't have grass on them, but we do have vegetation because they'll be part and parcel of a SUDS system. So there's that there. But then we also have our highways policies, which relate to footway crossings, and we do have some restrictions on those in relation to grass verges. So generally, if a grass verge is deeper than 3 meters from front to back, we'll refuse an application for a footway crossing on there, although we may look to use something like a grid system that allows grass to grow through it, so either a grasscrete or some other system on those verges if there's sufficient justification to. Because obviously what we don't want to do is sort of discriminate against those people who can't walk that distance. So if somebody is particularly, holds a blue badge and has specific mobility issues, we're not necessarily going to just go, no, you can't have a footway crossing. We've got to sort of consider that. But that policy also relates to trees as well. So we refuse quite a lot that would impact trees.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Veronica, you've got your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yes, our local councillor has said that if there's a notification on, outside a property that's applied for a planning application, if nobody objects, the way the city council is overrun with applications, everything, they're more likely to just say, go ahead. I mean, we've got an example at the bottom of the road where which actually has city council, it, Simon, it borders the Millennium Green, which is a slink and biodiversity area. It's got trees that belong to the city council on one boundary, and it's got the stream which floods. The owner ticks all those as being no, no, no. So he's applied 3 or 4 times now to build a 5-bedroomed house on the site, and we've all objected. But I understand that if we don't object, that could just be passed because he's ticked no, no, no.
Yeah, I mean, we see that a lot, and I'm sure Matt might say the same thing, that just because somebody ticks a box on a form, it doesn't mean that that's not the case. And so that's so there is an element of the planning officers having to check and validate the information that comes in, because yes, there is a box on there that says, are there any trees on the development? Will trees be impacted? And so many people tick no, and you look at it and you go, well, there's all these trees there. So so that's part of our internal consultation process. Obviously, if no local residents or very few residents object and haven't necessarily articulated that objection well, that does mean that perhaps it's more likely to get consent, especially if there are no major objections from the statutory consultees. So if our mains drainage team don't have any objections, or we don't have objections in terms of biodiversity or ecology or arboriculture, but there are still the other regulations that need to be put in place. So there are things called the 30-degree rule, which means that you can't have windows that look into or onto other properties. So you have to measure the angles out, looking at things like the building design, the way that it lays out on the street, the highways thing. So they still have to go through all of that process. It still has to meet those planning policy elements. It's not like they'll just go, well, it doesn't matter that it doesn't meet these things. It still has to sort of either be seen to be that those policies don't apply to that development, or that it is compliant with it. So then it's the building regs, which is separate for us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Simon, there's also a question about, and I think you did mention it, who enforces the planning conditions?
Oh yeah. So we have a planning enforcement team that's not particularly big, and so they would enforce the planning conditions or the planning permission, as long as they know there's a breach of consent being made. So that relies on somebody raising the fact that something is not happening as per the approved consent. I think if you think about the fact that we've got, maybe they may have I think it's a team of about 5 or 6 at the most, and there are around 8,500 to 9,000 planning applications consented every year. It's not possible to drive around every single one on a regular basis and check everything's being implemented as per the plan, particularly when it comes to household or small scale developments, which are probably have less rigorous management anyway, because the large scale developments will be by larger scale developers who have site managers and everything in place. That's not to say things aren't done in line with permission, because quite often they're not. But there is at least a bit of a clearer way to get in and review, and they often have to submit more detail. The other bit would be obviously that if a condition is attached to a development, so we say that we need a landscaping plan as part of the building of a new house. That has to be submitted, and we would see that as a consultee, and we would either approve it or ask for an amendment, or say that it's not fit for purpose, in which case they have to go away and redo it. So we have that element of monitoring conditions. Impacts on trees, though, tree works and biodiversity stuff, though, tends to fall to the ARB and the ecology officers, which is very difficult. Or if it's a breach of wildlife legislation, then it's the police who enforce that.
Right. Okay. I mean, I think there's I mean, I always feel like there's a real role for us as kind of interested citizens to just kind of take a notice of what's going on developments. And certainly, you know, if you see the root protection fencing kind of getting gradually smaller, you know, closer to the tree, or things dumped near a tree. The difficulty is that I don't think that as citizens we can kind of go in and start demanding that they move tons of cement. I think our role would be to notify the council. Is that
yeah. I mean, it's one of these things. You know, there's the planning enforcement team, you know, are in effect, I suppose, funded through things like planning fees, but they also have been able to grow the team by securing prosecutions where there are fines imposed, particularly things like Proceeds of Crime Act as well, which we've spoken about. So we've mentioned this before with things like tree preservation orders as well. Somebody goes ahead and does something that was not consented, and in doing so, can increase the value of what they're doing, or increase the amount of profit that they're making by doing something. So classic examples was down, I think, on sandbanks in Poole, where you know, somebody goes out and fells a tree with a tree preservation order on it, and the value of his property increases by, you know, £1 million, because he now has a view of the sea, which he didn't before. So in theory, you could prosecute them for the fine for works to trees that were unconsented, but also the proceeds of crime. So you could actually seek to secure that £1 million on top of the £20,000 fine for the TPO breach, and that would then go use that funding to increase the team. So
right. Okay, no, that's great. Question here about is it possible to stop front gardens getting paved over? So although it's prohibited, that lots of people just do it and they don't need planning permission. So
well, yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Now, in theory, you are able to. I think you're able to put down 5 square meters of impermeable surface in your front garden without planning consent. But I know from having driven around the city that there are lots of contractors out there who are covering entire front gardens with impermeable paving. And then when I see that somebody's made an application for a footway crossing, I check whether they've got planning consent for that front garden space, and they haven't. So, I mean, again, it's a difficult one. It's a breach of the Town and Country Planning Act, so it'd be enforceable by the City Council if they've done that, if they've paved more than 5 square meters with impermeable paving. That doesn't mean, though, that they can't dig up their entire front garden and lay it to gravel or to slabs or to block paving, which would be seen as a permeable surface.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's a different.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question here about tree preservation orders. So a tree on private property, is it true that a tree on private property can't have a preservation order placed on it?
No. Any tree, anywhere, pretty much could have a TPO put on it. It gets a little bit trickier when you get to trees on diocese and crown land. But no, I mean, 99% of, or 99.99% of all the 1,800 or whatever it is now TPOs in Birmingham are trees in private properties.
But is it that they have to be seen by the public, so they're providing amenity?
Yeah. So I think I mean that's an interesting point. So essentially, the visual amenity of a tree plays quite a high role in whether a tree preservation order is defendable or defensible, should I say. So if somebody was to challenge it, that is something that might be taken into account. However, yeah, I mean, I think we've definitely got tree preservation orders on for trees that are between buildings, but actually are visible by quite a number of residents, not just from the street. So actually, it's part and parcel of a broader visual landscape. And we can also think about how those trees play a part in the wider delivery of ecosystem services benefits. So I think, you know, as long as we've got a clear process that we're following and we can show that we are applying that to be fair and consistent, I think certainly going forward, we'll probably see that visual amenity aspect might become less of the divisive or decisive aspect, and the broader ecosystem services and climate resilience benefits pop up the order a bit. Because you're right, I mean, in the past we have had things where trees would in other circumstances have been eligible, or you would have put a TPO on it, but its lack of visibility has been an issue, I suppose, previously. But no, it can be put on private property, yeah.
And there's a section on Birmingham City Council's website about how to apply for a tree preservation order. And my understanding is that anybody can apply for a tree preservation order. So it's not that it's on your land. If you're concerned about it. And I think there's also something about if the tree is going to be under threat. So, you know, if it's proposed development, we've certainly got one in Handsworth Wood where they've TPO'd trees.
I think it's worth just saying there that, I mean, you know, although we're saying about PCC, it's not allowed. Okay, so yeah, I was just going to come on to that. So where we've done things like this before, we have had a bit of a flurry of tree preservation orders for trees that are within public land, so on land owned by the city council, whether that be on the highway or in parks or green space or housing land. The point of a key point of a tree preservation order is to provide some modicum of control over what happens to that tree. So it means that we, as the local authority, can have some influence over whether the tree is felled, if it's pruned, if somebody wants to prune it, how much it can be pruned, when it can be pruned, or even if it needs to be pruned. We can actually refuse those. If we were to put TPOs on trees that we own and that we already have that level of control over, it's sort of basically defeating the point, isn't it? We already have that level of control. We have that influence over that control over that tree. So, and we'd just be applying to ourselves for consent, although it's a slightly different part of the council. So, as a general rule, it's not that we won't or can't, it's just that generally it's unnecessary, because our tree policies and practices should be such that we're not doing things that are not essential. And to be fair, we don't have the budget to do things that aren't essential. Yeah. So but we don't get me wrong though, we have TPO trees in public spaces in parks, particularly where something might have been going to occur in there. Maybe there's some development going on. A section of land is temporarily passed to somebody else to manage. The same would apply to schools that are going over to academies as well. So where we have control over the trees at the moment, when they pass to an academy, we'd no longer necessarily be responsible for those trees. So we may look to put a preservation order on those trees, even though ultimately they are still our property. The leasee, so the academy, has that management responsibility for them for the duration of their lease. So we might put that TPO in that case.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Simon. That's great. I think you've answered all the questions that came up in the chat, so thank you for that. I'd like to say thank you so much, Simon, for that talk on trees in planning applications. Really interesting as ever. I think certainly what we're really keen to see is that that local people feel empowered to check planning applications in your area, and just to have a quick look to see, are there any trees that are going to be impacted? And if there are, to kind of start thinking about some of the things that Simon's been talking about. You know, is it worth putting in a planning objection or a comment supporting it if they're doing some good things? Certainly, if you need any support around CAVAT, you know, just email Birmingham Tree people and we can support around that, because sometimes that's an issue that can be picked up as well as part of these applications. But we definitely need more people looking at planning applications, because certainly Simon and his very, very tiny team, you know, just it'd be helpful, I guess, more hands on deck, isn't it, Simon? If somebody can say that they've found some issues with a planning application around trees, it just gives them a bit of... Oh, and Mac is saying we need to run a CAVAT training day. So that's something we'll probably do in 2024. Our next training session in November, the third Saturday in November, is how to prune orchard trees. And we're doing a live training session at Manor Farm Park in Northfield. So we'll be teaching you how to prune I don't know what trees they've got down there. I guess it's kind of apples and pears and things like that. And then in December, the training is at Highbury Park, and we're going to be doing conifer identification trail. So we'll be walking around trying to identify conifers, which is always, for me anyway, a bit of a hard task, but there's going to be some experts there who'll be helping us. So just huge thank you, Simon, for your time this morning. And that's just been really interesting. And thank you so much, everybody, for attending. And I hope you found it interesting as well.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Tonya.
Thank you. Brilliant. Nice to see you.
See you soon.
Albeit remotely.
Thank you so much.
Then.
Bye.
Thanks again.
Bye.
I've lost.
Bye.